Absolutely honored to be joined by James Cameron and Gale Hurd to talk about the 40th anniversary of the Terminator, which is just simply extraordinary that it's been 4 decades. I thought we could start, guys, by hearing about where you both were in your careers as filmmakers before you embarked on making this movie. Jim, you want to start?
Yeah, I can't speak for Gale, but I was pretty much nowhere. I had tried directing a movie I won't mention the name of because everybody else is happy to talk about it all day long. I got fired after 6 days of shooting. I was broke and no prospects. I didn't think I'd ever get hired again. It turned out that actually having even a crappy directing credit did help a little bit. So, I was nowhere. So I knew that I wasn't, nobody was going to offer me anything. So I had to write something. I had to attach myself to it firmly. It had to be good enough to get made. And that seemed the only avenue. So, writing the script was kind of a means to an end, if you will. I mean, I had my sights set on directing. Gale and I talked about it. We said, all right, this is a good project because it can be shot locally. It can be shot relatively low budget. It's got a few isolated effects sequences in it. And I had an effects, kind of my only credential was in visual effects. So I figured, all right, that gives me a slight edge over another director. Gale, you want to haul off for where you were at that point in your life?
Well, at that point in my life, if this hadn't worked out, I don't think I would be in the film business now. Essentially, I mean, I've been working for Roger Corman for a number of years. At a certain point, he basically said, there's nothing more I can teach you. I went, you mean you're firing me? And he said, not really firing you. I'm just sort of kicking you out. And I begged to be able to return as his assistant at New World Pictures. That wasn't in the cards. So I think both of us laid it all on the line for the Terminator.
Did you come to know each other through Corman? How did you come? What was your first meeting?
I remember exactly when it was. I was working in the model shop, and Gale came in, and I kind of, as I recall, Gale, I kind of gave you a tour around the model shop, and but I was working on Nell, which was the hero's spaceship, in my own kind of private space. And Gale, if I remember correctly, you were down the hall doing some pickup reshoots on Humanoids from the Deep.
Yes, yeah, Humanoids from the Deep, and Jim was working on Battle Beyond the Stars. A script by John Sayles.
We kind of hit it off anyway. I mean, the short version is we hit it off and we became friends, and we talked about doing projects together. I mean, I think each of us recognized in the other the kind of the eye of the tiger, the ambition, the intelligence, creativity, whatever it is to potentially succeed. And I give the same advice to people now that I guess I was instinctively following then, which is don't try to make pals with somebody above you in the food chain. Make good, strong, networked relationships with people at your level, and then form a team or an alliance or whatever, and then push forward from a position of some strength. And I think a lot of people sort of miss that point these days.
Or they don't want to start at the bottom. And both of us really started at the bottom.
Gale, what did you make of Jim when you met him?
Well, I was really impressed. I was looking for a reason to get out of the reshoots because they were essentially, this reshoot was for nudity reasons. So it was a girl getting out of a pup tent and running down, I think, the beach or something like that. And it was a sequence that the original director of Humanoids from the Deep, Barbara Peters, a woman, did not want to direct. So I believe they hired the first assistant director to film that. And that was not something I was really comfortable with. So I went into the model shop. Roger had also said, stop by and see how the models are coming along. Jim, which you can see in everything that he's done ever since, had a reason, had a character reason behind the spaceship models. And, there was such insight there. It wasn't just, oh, this is really cool shit. And that really surprised me. because you didn't find a lot of that back then. And then he went from building spaceship models, and this can only happen with Roger Corman. And he was very soon the art director for the entire film. And
the following week, I think.
I mean, you guys getting shotgunned into that kind of work, I assume, helped tremendously with the Terminator. Jim, you mentioned that it was sort of like a necessity to write this project, but that I wanted to ask you both, it seems like you wrote with budget in mind and that you were very selective about what kind of effects work you were going to need. Maybe you both can talk about that, about knowing like how much money you could get and what that meant creatively with the restrictions.
Well, look, Gale was already producing. I think you had already done another film, a car chase movie.
Smokey Bites the Dust. Another one not worth seeing.
Yeah, but it's all experience. So anyway, I looked to Gale as a more experienced producer, and we talked about the type of project we would do. We had another one called Labyrinth that we were developing, but it seemed out of reach. It seemed too outlandish, a lot of sets and a lot of visual effects. And, we were in this little clique of people who were all jostling for some kind of a project. And, said, all right, so what are the ground rules? We got to be able to shoot it, on the streets, available light, present day locations, would do it under the radar, guerrilla filmmaking, non-union, blah, 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 all the stuff that we were used to from Corman. And then, okay, well, what fits that? Well, I got this thing, I'm calling the Terminator. Here, why don't you read the treatment? And Gale's like, this is exactly what we should be doing. Let's do it. I mean, it was pretty much that simple, but it was definitely constrained by budget going in, right? We knew we couldn't raise $20 million at that stage. That was like an amount beyond our imagination. But we thought, maybe 3-4 million, something like that. I mean, we're thinking like a little bit above John Carpenter, Deborah Hill break-in level, with Halloween, but not much beyond that. And it's like, okay, who's going to give, first-time director and, a producer who's working at the Corman level that kind of a budget? Well, it better be a damn compelling story. That was our thinking, and it better be makeable. It better appear to be makeable. And Gale had chops. She had credentials. My credential was I'd done visual effects on a couple of films. So I thought, all right, well, an effects film kind of makes sense, because if it was just a rom-com or a straight horror film or whatever, I don't bring any added value. So we were very strategic about our thought process going into, pitching this piece.
Gale, can you talk about hustling around and raising some of the money and looking for distributors at that time too? Because people forget this is an independent movie. This isn't, even though it's one of the most significant franchises of the last 40 years.
It is 100% an independent film. So the first place I went was Roger Corman, because of course you go to the people you know. And Roger basically said, my top end budget is $2 million. You can't make this for $2 million. And if you try, it will be, it won't be the movie that you and Jim want to make. So God bless the late Roger Corman for that. But that was still painful. But luckily, the woman who had been, I would think you would call her chief operating officer of New World Pictures, had moved on to Orion, Barbara Boyle, as had the story editor, Francis Dole. And I sent the script to them. They read it and liked it. And Mike Medavoy I had known because he had been a co-financier with Roger on a number of films, a slate of films. But interestingly enough, the domestic side of Orion didn't come in right away. It was the foreign side. The money that we got, and it wasn't all of the money, was an IFCOM. We had to raise the rest of it. And Orion domestic would have first right of refusal on the U.S. rights. So the problem is that everyone wants guaranteed U.S. distribution, not just an IFCOM deal. But we were able to get $500,000 advance from HBO. They were the first to come in with an actual commitment, and that was for cable. And then literally, I mean, as Jim probably remembers, I mean, the number of doors slammed in our faces. The meetings we had were basically people would say, "Yeah, I'm interested in this, but sign this option agreement where I'll control it forever." That is somebody else, and with no obligation to ever pay you a dime, ever, get both of you on board to produce and direct. Those were the kinds of deals we were being offered. I mean, it literally, when you hear about the horrors of Hollywood, we went through many stages of Dante's Hell. But the strangest thing is the way we ended up with financing at Hemdale was that remember Chuck Simon, Jim? So a friend of mine basically said, I believe there's a company called Hemdale, and they have a 3-picture deal with Orion. They're looking for their 3rd picture. The first 2 had been total financial disasters. So I started calling. They wouldn't call me back. So then I found out from him that Barry Plumley, the head of production development, was trying to sell a desk.
This is a great story.
So you have to be willing to do just about anything to get your foot in the door. So I said I was interested in the desk. He called me back.
This is classic. This is a classic Gale story. I mean, I give Gale total credit for piecing this whole thing together from disparate sources. And, I think between the two of us, we were, cheeky enough or confident enough that we were able to turn down some things. And I have to credit Gale with backing me. There were people that wanted the script, and I think the highest offer was $1 million from Paramount. $1 million, I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even visualize what that looked like in a pile, couldn't even fathom it. And we turned it down because they didn't want me to direct it. They wanted, an established director, and, other people might have wanted an established producer. So Gale and I kind of went in as a joined at the hip kind of team and dared them to try to break us apart, which, they almost everybody involved tried to at one point or another. And, we emerged still as a team, still holding the rights, and with a budget that was borderline makeable. I mean, it got pretty skinny at times. Big chunk of the money went to Arnold, obviously. And, that cut into our below the line somewhat. And we did have some ambitious effects. Fortunately, we met Stan Winston, who neither one of us had known, and Stan just really loved the piece, and he jumped in with both feet, and he hung on, because we wound up with a big production delay of about 6 or 8 months, something like that, and so Stan hung on. He worked on the film kind of quietly, worked on the effects and so on during that hiatus period, and then when we went, we hit the ground running with, it was just, we just got dropped into a combat zone. When we finally got access to Arnold, he had to go off and do another film. And so in fact, I think, Gale, didn't we shoot for like 8 or 10 days without Arnold? Like almost a quarter of the schedule?
I think so. And not only that, but not that long before shooting, Linda Hamilton sprained her ankle or tore all the ligaments, and we had to completely reschedule the film because initially we were doing her sequences, and it was a lot of the running, and she couldn't do that. So that was another thing that impacted not only the schedule but the budget, because there were locations that we had paid for that we couldn't use, and I mean, every time you shift something, there's a financial cost.
So what does that mean? You're just doing a lot of days with Rick Rossovich and Paul Winfield instead when your 2 stars are not available to you?
No, she was available. She just couldn't run.
She couldn't run. Okay.
She couldn't walk. She could barely walk. I mean, we got a football doctor to come in and give her a sports wrap every day so that she could hobble around. And the funny thing is, we already knew we weren't going to have Arnold for the first part of the shoot. It was like, hey, no problem. We'll shoot all of Linda's scenes first. Well, then that didn't work out. So it's like, okay, what do we do? I mean, I think if Gale and I hadn't been through the Corman experience, which is just so scrappy and so chaotic, and you never know from one day to the next what you're going to do, and you got to shift gears in a split second, and you know that it's a steamroller, you've got to shoot, or you simply don't have the shots later in the cutting room. And we'd been through that, enough times. We just knew that you gotta solve it. Nobody's going to solve it for you.
I was hoping you guys could talk a little bit about, because when you're shopping for the budget, I assume that Arnold and Michael and Linda are not attached at that point, right? You haven't cast the film?
I think, yeah, we had Linda before the hiatus. So when we cast Arnold, we wound up with this kind of 6 or 7 month wait. And I think we had already cast Linda and Michael at that point, and everybody was just waiting. That's my memory of it. And so I went off and wrote Aliens.
And Rambo First Blood Part 2.
And Rambo.
Yeah.
So, we were just kind of spinning our wheels. And so in a funny way, it's the best prepped movie I've ever done, at least in terms of storyboarding and pre-visualization and design work and all that, because I wound up with 6 months that I didn't expect to have. Now, we weren't getting paid. My mom was sending me, she'd cut these clippings out of the newspaper where you could get 2 Big Macs for the price of one, and I was kind of living on clippings. And I'd do a couple of, I'd paint, I was a painter, and I would paint some low budget movie posters for like the cheapest releasing house that was even below Roger Corman, believe it or not, in LA. But they'd pay me $1,500 for one painting. I could do it in a day, and I could live on it for a month. So that's how I had the free time. I mean, I lived pretty cheaply, as you hear. And, so I used the time to write. Gale, I think you were kind of working in the background on the Terminator budget and various other things.
Yeah. And I was taking odd jobs on other films, like Alligator.
Oh, right. Yeah. But that wasn't Corman, right?
I think it was Charlie Band, but no, it was, yeah.
Low, yeah, I mean, we're talking still, we hadn't broken through from that low tier of scrappy guerrilla filmmaking, super independent production companies.
And we didn't know that it was impossible, that what we were, the ambitions we had to make this film were essentially impossible. It doesn't seem like $6.4 million is a lot of money now, but back then it actually was for 2 essentially neophyte filmmakers.
I wanted to ask you both if you felt like at the time you were attempting to do something that the movie now clearly looks like, which is it looks like a hinge point from the Corman era of exploitation movies and independent genre pictures towards this more technologically focused, star-driven franchise entertainment. And it might be the most significant example that comes in the aftermath of the New Hollywood. Did you guys have aspirations to that kind of thing? I know it's a little high-minded, but it felt like a very purposeful decision to try both at the same time.
Well, I mean, we had examples like, obviously Carpenter and Deborah Hill breaking in and slowly incrementally driving their budgets up. And we had other examples like, George Lucas, who hadn't done that much when he did Star Wars, and made that film very, very cheaply. So he made that film for, I think, $9.8 million, which is almost unfathomable now. And we had just done Battle Beyond the Stars together, and that was Roger's most expensive film by a factor of 2 or 3. I think I don't think he'd ever made a film above $1 million, and that was made for close to $2 million. But we saw how we could emulate a Star Wars level movie fairly credibly at a fifth of the budget. So we thought, all right, I think we were thinking we could make the Terminator for a couple $1 million, and then the realities hit in of all the prosthetic makeup and all of the laser opticals and miniatures that we had to do, and so many nights of street car chase stuff out in the city. And it looked like it was going to be more like 3.5, and then it was 4 and 4.5. But we managed to, Gale, tribute to Gale, managed to piece that money together. Look, there was no game plan about how that was going to sit in a Hollywood ecosystem looking back from 10, or 40 years later. I mean, we couldn't think at that level. We were just focused on the task. Here's the story we have to tell. We got to cast it credibly in order to get some money. Hey, you know, Arnold's name came up. We kind of rejected it at first because he didn't fit the character. The character was written to be an undercover agent. That's the whole point. He's a cyborg so that he's a credible human that can pass as human, right? Without a rubbery skin and glassy eyes, right? And you know, he's got to be able to fit in. That's the whole concept of an undercover kind of assassin. And Arnold doesn't fit in. I mean, when we cast him, we knew that we were shifting the character, that it was a big change from the concept or the premise we had been working under for, I don't know, a year of development, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, it just changed. And all of a sudden, he's this iconic figure. He's going to be a Panzer tank. He's going to just push through a crowd, push anybody out of the way. Not very low key. And it's like, okay, fine, let's lean into that. People have asked me, kind of what I'm proudest of, which is a very hard question to answer. And I think what I'm proudest of is that we had the nimbleness or the agility of thought to be able to pivot the whole idea on a dime, literally in minutes, sitting there, with Arnold and then back with John Daly of Hemdale and talking about how he might be a part of this and saying, because he was not proposed to play the Terminator. He was proposed to play the hero, because you cast the hero and then you get the budget. That's how it works, right? And so he was put up as the hero, Reese, the good guy. And I said, that doesn't work. That's not going to work. But he would make a hell of a Terminator. And Daly went and made the deal, and then we were on, and the rest is history. But I think what I'm proudest of is that we were so used to that chaotic, do anything, make it work, make it happen kind of mentality from low budget, that it was like, okay, yeah, sure, we can change our entire concept, spin on a dime, no problem. What's this?
Gale, I was curious how you felt about Arnold too, because on the one hand, he's a commodity in some ways at the box office. He's a rising star, but he is playing the heavy, which is really unusual. Like, how did you perceive the decision to go with Arnold?
He got the movie made, and he really understood the Terminator. I have to say, I was blown away. He came in and he said, the Terminator is like a shark. He's not going to blink. He's going to move his head and look for his target like a shark does. Nothing else matters. And it was a brilliant conception of the role. So he really did bring a lot to it. It wasn't just, it wasn't just, okay, he's going to walk through, he's going to be doing sort of the same part that he played in Conan the Barbarian. It was a completely different approach, and it showed he was an actor.
I don't think we realized how smart a move it was for us until we saw the dailies from Arnold's first day, because he was already in the makeup and hairstyle sort of post having gone through the fire. His eyebrows are gone. His hair is singed back. He looks very kind of both synthetic and kind of punked out, right? And they had lightly glycerined his face, and he had this pale, and he was in these kind of greenish blue lights from the dashboard of the car, from the environment. And he was just driving the cop car and looking around and scanning. And it was this long lens hood mount close up. And man, he was terrifying. You didn't think of Conan for a split second. He was a brand new guy, something you'd never seen before, something I'd never seen before. My great aspiration was to do better than, Yul Brynner in Westworld, and we overshot that mark by miles with Arnold. It was a smart move for him. It got him out of the kind of loincloth, oiled up barbarian mode, which frankly, he would have been stuck in that and his career would have just ultimately tapered off. But he just completely transformed himself into something nobody had ever seen before, didn't see coming, and applauded. And it was a smart move for us because, he was who he was. Now, I think it's important to point out that Arnold was not a star. it's easy to look back and say, okay, step one, he did Conan. He'd already done some stuff before that, but it was pretty rinky-dink. And then, so his first step up was Conan. He would have gotten stuck at that level forever if he hadn't done the Terminator. Next step was, I shouldn't say that. Arnold is a guy who bulldozes all obstacles. And if he wanted to be a movie star, he would have ultimately become one. But I think the Terminator definitely turbocharged or accelerated, that process for him.
One thing that really jumps out to me about this film and then becomes a trend in all your films for both of you guys is that, strong female characters are like a signature of Jim, a lot of your films, and Gale, a lot of the work that you've done over the years too. And you told that story about working on Humanoids from the Deep, Gale, and having a female filmmaker, and then that person getting removed from the project and shooting the naked scenes. And then you've got Sarah Connor, whereas as critical as Arnold is to the story, Sarah is really the through line of everything in the whole franchise in many ways. And I was hoping you could talk a bit about that, because that also is unorthodox in a genre movie at this time. She's really the hero. Reese is sort of the hero, but she's really our hero by the time we get to the credits of the film.
Well, I don't know, Gale. I think that's one of the things you responded to. I mean, I wrote this story that was female-centric, and in my mind, I was kind of doing another, Last Girl horror film with a tech component to it. I don't think I had made some leap that it was some big, feminist statement, I think, Gale, I mean, if you want to speak to, how that affected you.
Well, sure. I mean, the thing is that Sarah Connor's every woman. Sarah Connor is someone who doesn't believe that she is going to be the savior of the future. And by the way, and she doesn't want the responsibility. And truthfully, who would? And yet she finds the power within herself to succeed, and then obviously come back in Terminator 2 completely transformed. But yeah, and there's nothing gratuitous about it. There is literally nothing gratuitous. She doesn't have the usual tropes that you expect, being a victim, being the girlfriend ornament.
Yeah, there was no shower scene.
No,
there's never a shower scene when a guy's the hero.
and the lovemaking scene is not gratuitous. And since we had an R-rated movie, I mean, it could have been more so. So and the other thing is, going back to an earlier question, which is the name of the nightclub is Tech Noir. And that was purposeful in the sense of, this is a film about the dark side of technology.
Well, we like noir films. We like the stylized lighting and so on. The kind of the German expressionist kind of lighting that came into film noir. I mean, I don't think we ever thought of shooting it in black and white, but we did go with a kind of a monochrome blue palette, which kind of worked for me. I think there are things that you do instinctively that are innate, and then you intellectualize it after the fact. For me, it was instinctively obvious that a strong female character would be interesting. At the time, I can say that all came later when we got applauded for it, but that's not true, because the one film I really wanted to make was Aliens, and it wasn't even called Aliens at that point, but I had already signed on to do that before I even started on the Terminator, and I wrote that script before I started on Terminator, and I was attracted to Ripley. I mean, just the iconic Ripley, who just, that's a Last Girl story. It's a very elevated version of a Last Girl horror story, but done very, very well, and with an amazing actor. Sigourney and I are friends. We've been friends for 38 years, I guess, and so I think there are things you do instinctively, and, like I can do the whole Freudian thing and go back. My mom was a great example of a strong but thwarted, female psyche, somebody who wasn't applauded for the kind of independent things that they did, because that wasn't what the world was like at that point. And Gale, I don't know about your dynamics with your mom, but she was certainly a pretty strong-willed character.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. I mean, your first, not your first feature, but in many ways your first feature. In your mind, your producing partner is a woman too. I mean, this is notable to me.
That didn't even occur to me as a thing. I mean, Gale and I just recognized each other. It really didn't have much to do with gender, notwithstanding the fact that we ultimately got married. Um, but no, I mean, I think we just recognized each other as the kind of science fiction nerd, kind of mentality. We knew the films that we loved. We knew the films we wanted to make. We both had that aggressive can-do spirit, and I think we felt that each other had the chops to make things happen,
And that we could trust each other. I mean, this is a business where you can't always trust other people. And when we worked together on Battle Beyond the Stars, I was the assistant production manager. Jim did everything. I mean, and it was the art department. I mean, and you remember I'd stay up all night, even though it wasn't my job, painting the sets Malmori green. I mean,
you got to see me at the worst. I mean, you got to see me after 75 hours straight with no sleep. And that was without drugs, just a lot of caffeine. I think there might have been some caffeine diet pills in there somewhere, but there was certainly nothing harder than that.
So we knew we could work together. We knew we could trust each other. And I had his back and he had mine. And honestly, that's what you need in any kind of partnership. Because in this business, a lot of people will smile and, tell you one thing and essentially do whatever it is they want once they believe that you're on board. And, I've certainly experienced that because I assumed that everyone would be as, truthful and loyal as Jim.
Yes, well,
I wanted to ask you.
It doesn't happen.
Well, yeah. I wanted to ask you both about shooting in LA. I rewatching the film last night. You just don't. There's no productions in LA anymore. You don't see this kind of thing, and seeing it, especially at this time, and especially the night shoots and the motorcycle and car chase is just remarkable. Like, could you just take me back to that period of when you were shooting the film in the city at that time and what it was like?
Well, the interesting thing is we weren't supposed to shoot in LA. The original conception of the film was we were going to shoot in Toronto. And they were going to close down some of the lanes in the major freeway there. What is it? The 401? Anyway, I'm not
401,
sure.
the QEW.
Yeah, and then we were preempted because Arnold had to go do Conan the Destroyer for Dino De Laurentiis, which meant we had to start filming in March. You can't film streets in Toronto when there's still ice and snow on the ground. And that is actually why we ended up shooting in LA. And it was the year, I think, of the Olympics. So it was actually a lot more deserted than usual.
Yeah, I always wanted to do a car chase on ice. It all takes place at about 8 miles an hour. Everybody's wheels are spinning, and you can see the other guys right there, but you can't get to them, Look, it would have been a whole different film, very comedic.
But there are iconic images, as you know, since you just rewatched the film. I mean, Griffith Park Observatory and the 2nd Street Tunnel and all of that. And downtown LA is a character in this. But it created a lot more issues. We shooting in downtown LA at the time. I mean, we were what they call Skid Row on the Nickel. It was pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it was dangerous. The funny thing is, Adam Greenberg, who shot it, he and I would drive around at night, and he'd have his incident light meter out, and he'd go, "Stop, boy, stop." He always called everybody boy. "Stop, boy." He was Polish. And, the driver would stop and he'd get out and he'd go, "There is light. I can do exposure," And there are times for Adam, there are times I said, "This is the perfect place. We're going to shoot here." And he'd go, "How I get exposure? There's nothing." Because we couldn't afford big lights. We couldn't afford Muscos. I don't even think they had the Musco back then, but they had Condors. You could go up with a 10K or something and light up the block. We didn't have any of that stuff. So we literally drove around until we found brightly lit places, like next to car lots were great because the car lots had a lot of light. Underneath Grand Avenue in downtown LA, it was a place called Lower Grand. I think it's called Lower Grand now, called Thaddeus Kosciuszko Way, where the whole thing was lined with fluorescent lights. It was only about a quarter of a mile long, but man, we used that street for sure because once again, no light. Adam was a genius at doing just a little bit of supplemental light on the actors' faces. Maybe sometime we'd have one light over on the curb and kind of pan it, as the car went through, really cheesy stuff, but it gives it a very kind of edgy quality,
Yeah, hearing you talk about noir, that was the thing I noticed watching it, is just these very soft shafts of light across the actors' faces in these dark environments. And yeah, the on location shooting is just amazing. It is like a time and place so perfectly capturing that world. But you mentioned this is a movie about the present and the future, and like it's just incredible how prescient it is. I know you've talked about it in the past. I'm sure you talked about it at the 30th anniversary, the 20th anniversary, the 10th anniversary. But man, we are really in an AI era right now.
Yeah, well, it's more timely than it's ever been. But we didn't invent those ideas. I mean, we're responding to stuff that came before us. Colossus, the Forbin Project, HAL 9000 for 2001, Space Odyssey, Westworld. There's pretty long history of robotics, humanoid robotics. I don't think it had ever been done right. I mean, we gave ourselves the ethos that if we're going to see a robot, it's not a man in a suit. We're going to figure out how it can be a chrome skeleton, because that's the image that I had in my mind. But the idea of a kind of superintelligence, a machine superintelligence, it had been around in the literature of science fiction since the 30s, long before Turing and all those guys said this is going to really happen someday. The science fiction community was writing about it, and these were not new ideas. I think the idea that you've got a computer that's plugged in, that's paid for by defense dollars, that's plugged into weapon systems, that's the place where we are now. And people are going to give kill authority to a machine, and they're going to take humans out of the loop, because the cadence of events in a battle theater in the years to come is going to be so fast. You're fighting drone swarms, you're fighting multiple missile attacks, and your opponent is using AI to control their weapon systems. You're going to have no choice. The second you connect an AI to a weapon system, you're in Terminator world, and that's imminent. For real.
A couple of years ago, I visited the Pentagon. Jim, I don't know if you've been there. And the remarkable thing, the number of people who have Terminator posters in their offices.
Yeah, right. But they like the Terminator. They like the bad version of the Terminator.
Well, I also think hopefully it is a reminder of the great responsibility they have.
Well, look, I mean, that's art's job, right? That's cinema's job. Any of the arts is to remind us who we are as human beings, are the right way and the wrong way to be, good versus evil. The thing about AI is, the thing about, not Gen AI. I know everybody in Hollywood's up in arms over Gen AI. That's a whole separate subject. But AGI, artificial general intelligence, so-called, super intelligence, that's a whole separate problem. And the people working on that are bound and determined to create what they call personhood, an actual ego, an actual entity that's an intelligent entity. And I always ask them, how are you going to put guardrails in that? And they say, oh, well, we'll do this thing called alignment, right? And that's aligning with human purpose and with the greater human good. Well, whose version of that? A Christian or a Muslim version of that, a Hindu version of that, a left-wing version of that, a right-wing version. I mean, we can't agree. We can't agree on what good and evil is. So what makes us think we can, feed that to a little nascent super intelligence, like, feeding a baby bird, with our morality and our sense of what's good and evil and best for human beings? We can't. It's impossible. It's almost definitionally impossible. And yet they're still bound and determined to create this thing. So when it wakes up, whatever, in whatever place, when it wakes up, it's going to look around and go, well, you fools don't know what you're doing, and you're about to annihilate yourselves and this perfectly beautiful planet. Let me just take over for a little while, see if I can fix things up. And that's the best we can hope for. It might just be like, what do I need you guys for?
Did either of you think of the film as a warning while you were making it? I'm asking about intention through the storytelling. Was this meant to be a warning?
I think at a subconscious level, yeah. I mean, but you know what? Yeah, but you don't set out to make necessarily a message movie. The first and foremost thing is we wanted it to be entertaining, and our bar was essentially good enough that we could do it again.
That's what I was just going to say. Our entire goal set consisted of getting a foot in the door, making a film that allowed us to continue to be filmmakers. And at some point in the distant future beyond that, which we couldn't even imagine, we would do something good.
You did something better than good. It's an absolutely amazing movie. I really appreciate the time. I do end every episode of this show by asking filmmakers what's the last great thing that they have seen. Have you guys seen anything good? Jim, I know you're always working on something. Gale, you too. Have you guys seen anything?
I've seen so many good things.
Tell me.
Jim, have you seen the animated movie from Latvia called Flow?
Oh,
No, but I hear
wonderful.
it's fantastic. That's definitely on my short list. What I saw that blew me away was Emilia Perez. I've seen it 3 times
Yes,
now.
me too. I loved it.
What did you both like about that film?
It's just not like any other film that's ever been made. I mean, I think it's bold, it's daring, it's a vision. It's beautifully executed. It's a beautiful piece of filmmaking. Zoe's, fantastic in it. So this is her season maybe to be recognized as at the stature that she should be recognized. So there's a lot of things in it that I just find, fascinating.
Great recommendations. Thank you both so much for this, and congrats on everything. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for having us on.
Thank you.